Sergeant Krell had seen a lot of things in his 43 years of military service. He'd witnessed the siege of Proxima, survived the bacterial wars of Theta Prime, and once watched a Glorbaxian cadet accidentally swallow his own translator chip and spend 3 days speaking exclusively in ancient Earth Swahili. But nothing, and Krell meant absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the human standing in his office asking if the training scenarios came with difficulty settings. The human's name was Jake Martinez, and he had the kind of smile that made Krell's primary stomach hurt. It was the smile of someone who thought danger was a suggestion rather than a reality. Jake stood at roughly 6 feet tall, which was average for his species, but short by galactic standards, with dark hair that looked like it hadn't met a comb in several weeks, and eyes that sparkled with what Krell could only describe as weaponized stupidity. "Let me get this straight," Krell said, leaning back in his chair with all 4 arms crossed. His exoskeleton made a creaking sound that usually intimidated recruits. Jake didn't even blink. "You've reviewed our training program, seen the mortality statistics, read the 17-page disclaimer about dismemberment and psychological trauma, and your first question is whether we have a hard mode?" "Well, yeah," Jake said, like this was the most reasonable thing in the universe. I mean, 40% fatality rate on the standard course sounds pretty tame. "What are we doing selling cookies door to door in a mild drizzle?" Krell's secondary brain, the one responsible for impulse control, briefly considered retirement. "Private Martinez, that 40% fatality rate is for our basic survival course. Basic, as in the one designed for species who've already proven they can survive their own homeworlds. The next level up has a 62% fatality rate." "Okay, now we're getting somewhere," Jake said, leaning forward with genuine interest. "What's after that?" "Certain death," Krell said flatly. "Define certain." 78% don't come back." "So you're saying there's a chance," Jake said, and Krell realized with growing horror that the human was serious. "What's the hardest thing you've got? Like the stuff you pull out when you really want to make someone regret their life choices?" Krell stared at the human for a long moment. In the corner of his office, his motivational poster about perseverance seemed to be mocking him. He'd put that poster up after the incident with the Glorbaxian and the translator chip, thinking he'd seen the worst the universe had to offer. How naive he'd been. "We have Scenario Omega-7, Krell said slowly, watching Jake's face for any sign of sanity. "It's never been completed. Not once. We use it as a theoretical exercise for command staff to demonstrate what happens when everything that can go wrong does go wrong simultaneously, while on fire, during an earthquake, while being chased by things with too many teeth." "Perfect," Jake said, clapping his hands together. "Sign me up for that." "Did you hear the part where I said never completed? As in, everyone who's attempted it has died, been permanently traumatized, or developed a phobia so specific we had to invent new therapy techniques?" "Yeah, but that just means nobody's done it yet. Someone's got to be first, right?" Jake's smile somehow got wider. "Besides, I saw on the brochure that you folks pride yourselves on pushing recruits to their limits. I'm just trying to help you maintain that reputation. Krell's third eye, the one that could see into the infrared spectrum and was mostly useless in administrative settings, twitched. He'd been doing this job for 15 years. He'd trained warriors from species that breathed methane, communicated through interpretive dance, and one memorable individual who was technically a hive mind of sentient fungi. He knew how to handle cocky recruits. You showed them what real danger looked like, they backed down, everyone learned a valuable lesson about hubris, and the galaxy kept spinning. But something about this human was different. It wasn't that Jake didn't understand the danger. It was worse than that. He understood it perfectly and thought it sounded fun. "You have 3 seconds to walk out of my office and sign up for the standard track like every other sane being in this facility," Krell said. "Or?" Jake asked. "Or I'm going to show you exactly what hard mode means, and when you wash out crying for your mother, I'm going to make sure every species in this coalition knows that humanity couldn't handle the real challenges." It was a bluff. Sort of. Mostly. Krell wasn't actually going to put an untested human through Scenario Omega-7. That would be insane. Criminal even. But the threat usually worked. Pride was a universal constant. Jake stood up, extended his hand in that bizarre human gesture of agreement, and said, "Deal. When do we start?" Krell stared at the offered hand, then at Jake's face, then back at the hand. Slowly, with the feeling of a person making a terrible mistake but unable to stop themselves, he reached out with his primary right arm and shook it. "Report to Briefing Room 7 tomorrow at 0600, Krell heard himself say. "And Private Martinez, update your will." "Don't have one," Jake said cheerfully. "Figured I'd just donate everything to science. They can figure out what went wrong after the fact." As Jake left the office, whistling something that sounded vaguely like a funeral march, Krell sat in silence. Then he opened his bottom desk drawer, pulled out the emergency flask he kept for special occasions, and took a long drink. It tasted like regret and poor life choices, which seemed appropriate. Tomorrow, he was either going to break this human's spirit or discover that humans were even more terrifying than the intelligence reports suggested. Either way, Krell suspected he was going to need a bigger flask. The briefing room was designed to intimidate. Dark walls, harsh lighting that cast dramatic shadows, and a holographic display that could show fatality statistics in real time. Krell had personally overseen the interior decoration, going for a vibe somewhere between military precision and existential dread. It worked on most species. The Vraxians got quiet and focused. The Centaurians started praying to their 17 different gods. Even the notoriously fearless Kragthons got a little pale around the mandibles. Jake Martinez walked in eating a breakfast burrito. "Private Martinez," Krell said, his voice dropping to what he called his command tone, and everyone else called his please don't make me do paperwork tone. "Are you consuming food in my briefing room?" "Yeah, you said 0600. That's breakfast time." Jake took another bite, utterly unbothered. "Want some? There's a pretty decent cafeteria on level 3. The chef's this 6-armed squid guy who makes a mean omelet. That's Lieutenant Squarp, and he's not a chef, he's a nutritional logistics officer. He flips eggs with 4 spatulas simultaneously. That's a chef in my book." Jake settled into a chair in the front row, right where Krell could keep a close eye on him. "So, what's this hard mode all about?" Krell was saved from responding by the arrival of his staff. Lieutenant Vorp oozed into the room first, his gelatinous body rippling with what Krell had learned to recognize as anxiety. Vorp was a Blorbian, meaning he was essentially a highly intelligent pile of sentient jelly with a master's degree in tactical operations. When he was nervous, he sweated. Given that his entire body was already 90% moisture, this created puddles. "Sergeant," Vorp said, his voice bubbling like someone talking through a fish tank. "Are we really doing this? The simulations I ran last night had a 99.97% fatality rate. The only reason it's not 100% is because the computer assumed there was a margin of error in its own calculations." "We're doing this," Krell confirmed. "The human asked for it." "The human is insane," Vorp said, leaving a small puddle on the floor. "Hey, I'm right here," Jake said, waving. "And I prefer optimistically reckless, thank you very much." Commander Thex entered last, because Thex always entered last. As a Harmonite, Thex's entire body was composed of crystalline structures that resonated at different frequencies to produce sound. This meant Thex didn't so much talk as play music at people until they understood the vibes. Right now, Thex was resonating in a minor key that Krell's translator interpreted as deep concern mixed with morbid curiosity. "Commander, glad you could join us," Krell said. "Let's begin. Computer, display scenario Omega-7. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a hellish moon covered in red clouds and jagged terrain. Statistics began scrolling down the side, each one worse than the last. Atmospheric pressure that would crush most beings. Temperature swings of 200 degrees between day and night. Indigenous predators that hunted in packs and could smell fear from 3 kilometers away. And that was before the scenario modifications. "This is Zerath 9, Krell began, falling into his instructor cadence. "It's a moon, orbiting a gas giant in the Outer Rim territories. The atmosphere is technically breathable if you don't mind each breath feeling like inhaling glass shards. The indigenous life consists primarily of things that want to eat you, mate with you, or some terrifying combination of both. Sounds like a Tuesday night in Nevada, Jake muttered. Krell ignored this, mostly because he didn't know what a Nevada was and wasn't sure he wanted to. For scenario Omega-7, we've added some complications. Your equipment will be compromised. Your communication devices will be non-functional. Your navigation systems will be in a language you don't speak. And just to make things interesting, we're dropping you during predator mating season, when they're at their most aggressive. Vorp made a sound like bubbles popping in distress. Sergeant, I must protest. This is beyond training. This is attempted murder with paperwork. I'll sign whatever you want, Jake said, pulling a pen from his pocket. Got a waiver? I love waivers. They make everything sound way more exciting than it actually is. Thex chimed in with a chord progression that roughly translated to, Has anyone considered that maybe we shouldn't encourage the suicidal tendencies of an entire species? It's one human, Krell said. And if he wants hard mode, we'll give him hard mode. Maybe after a few hours on Zerath 9, he'll develop a healthy respect for mortality. Or he'll die, Vorp said, leaving another puddle. I'll have to do so much paperwork. I won't die, Jake said confidently. I've got a system. A system, Krell repeated slowly. Yeah. When in doubt, make it up as you go along and commit to the bit. Works every time. That's not a system. That's barely a philosophy. That's not even a coherent thought process. And yet here I am, alive and ready to rock. Jake finished his burrito, crumpled up the wrapper, and tossed it into a nearby recycling unit with the casual precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. So when do I drop? Krell looked at Vorp, who was now basically a puddle with anxiety. He looked at Thex, who was resonating in what could only be described as a musical sigh. Then he looked at Jake, who was smiling like someone about to go on a fun camping trip, rather than a death world designed to kill him in 17 different horrible ways. Oh, 600 tomorrow, Krell said. That gives us 24 hours to finalize the scenario parameters, and for you to get your affairs in order. Affairs are boring. I'm more of a live-in-the-moment guy. Jake stood up, stretched, and headed for the door. Oh, one question. Can I bring my own supplies? What kind of supplies? Just, the essentials. Duct tape, a laser pointer, maybe some hot sauce, the usual survival gear. Private Martinez, none of those things are standard survival gear. Not with that attitude, they're not. Jake paused at the door. See you tomorrow, Sarge. This is going to be great. As the door closed behind him, the 3 instructors stood in silence. Finally, Vorp spoke up, his voice small and bubbly. I've started preparing the memorial service. Should I include a slideshow or keep it simple? Simple, Krell said, rubbing his forehead with 2 hands, while the other 2 hung limply at his sides. And Vorp, run the simulations again. If this human is going to die on my watch, I want to know exactly how it's going to happen. Yes, Sergeant. Vorp oozed toward the door, leaving a trail of nervous sweat. For what it's worth, the human seems nice. Stupid, but nice. After they'd gone, Krell stood alone in the briefing room, staring at the holographic display of Zerath 9. Somewhere on that nightmare moon, either a legend was going to be born, or he was going to have to write the most awkward incident report in military history. He suspected it was going to be the incident report. It was always the incident report. The transport ship, designated Drop Vessel 79er, hummed with the kind of energy that preceded either great victories or spectacular disasters. Krell stood in the cargo bay, watching technicians make final adjustments to Jake's equipment, each adjustment making the gear slightly worse as per the scenario requirements. A faulty oxygen regulator here, a cracked display screen there, and a navigation computer that had been helpfully reprogrammed to display everything in ancient Vraxian, a language that had been dead for 3 centuries and that even Krell could barely read. Jake was doing jumping jacks. Private Martinez, Krell called out. Are you warming up for imminent death? Gotta get the blood flowing, Jake said, not even winded. Besides, I skipped breakfast like you suggested. Well, you didn't suggest it exactly, but I figured extra challenge, right? I suggested no such thing. I specifically said, make sure you eat because the emergency rations in your pack are expired. Oh, those are expired? Sweet, bonus difficulty unlocked. Jake grinned and continued his jumping jacks. What's the worst that could happen? Little food poisoning never killed anyone. It literally has, Thorpe said from his monitoring station. Thousands of beings. There are entire medical journals dedicated to death by expired rations. Well, yeah, but those people probably weren't committed to the bit, Jake said. He stopped jumping and walked over to his gear, picking up the helmet with the cracked display. Nice touch with the equipment sabotage, by the way. Really sells the whole impossible mission vibe. Krell had to admit, grudgingly, that the human had spirit. Stupid, reckless, probably going to get him killed spirit, but spirit nonetheless. You have one last chance to back out, Private. Once you're in that drop pod, the scenario is locked in. No emergency extraction unless you trigger your distress beacon, and even then, it'll take us 6 hours to reach you. 6 hours on a death moon with broken gear and angry wildlife. Sounds like my junior prom, honestly. Jake began strapping on his gear with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Quick question, though. The predators that hunt in packs, how many are we talking? Packs range from 5 to 20 Zerath hunter beasts. Why? Just want to know how many friends I'm making. Jake secured his chest rig, tested the weight distribution, and gave a thumbs up. Ready when you are, Sarge. Thex played a descending scale that roughly translated to, I want it noted for the record that this is a terrible idea, and we're all going to regret it. Noted, Krell said. All right, Martinez. Get in the pod. Try not to die too quickly. I've got 30 credits riding on you, lasting at least 4 hours. Only 30. That's kind of insulting. Jake climbed into the drop pod, a cramped cylinder barely big enough for a human to fit in. Who bet I'd last longer? No one, Thorpe admitted. The sergeant bet you'd last 4 hours. Everyone else gave you 90 minutes or less. I've got money on 47 minutes and 32 seconds specifically. That specific? I ran the numbers. It's when the first predator pack should reach your drop zone based on scent dispersal patterns. Well, hate to disappoint you, Thorpe, but I'm planning on lasting at least 47 minutes and 33 seconds out of spite. Jake settled into the pod's harness. Hit me. Krell walked over to the pod controls and paused with his hand over the launch button. Private Martinez, one piece of advice. On Zerath 9, everything is trying to kill you. The planet, the wildlife, the weather. Your only job is to survive long enough to activate the distress beacon at the extraction point. Don't try to be a hero. Don't try to fight everything you see. Just survive. Got it. Survive. Don't be a hero. Live to disappoint you another day. Jake gave a mock salute. See you in a few hours, Sarge. Krell pressed the button. The pod sealed with a hiss, and the launch mechanism engaged. 3 seconds later, Jake Martinez was hurtling towards Zerath 9 at terminal velocity, wrapped in a thin metal shell that was definitely not rated for atmospheric entry, but technically met the scenario requirements. So, Thorpe said as they watched the pod's trajectory on the monitors, who wants to start the betting pool for how he dies? I'm thinking crushed by predator. Exposure, one of the technicians called out. The temperature swings will get him. Equipment failure leading to asphyxiation, another suggested. Krell said nothing. He just watched the monitor as the pod entered Zerath 9's atmosphere and became a blazing streak across the red sky. Somewhere down there, a human was about to have the worst day of his life. Or the last day. Possibly both. The pod crashed into Zerath 9's surface exactly 97 seconds after launch. Krell held his breath, waiting for the telemetry to confirm that Jake had survived the impact. The seconds ticked by. 5, 10, 15. Then, crackling over the communication system, came Jake's voice, slightly strained but unmistakably alive. Okay, so that landing was way less fun than advertised. Also, I think I broke one of your sensors, possibly several sensors. Could be all the sensors, honestly. Hard to tell with all the sparks and the smell of burning. Thorpe immediately pulled up the vital signs monitor. He's alive. Elevated heart rate, slight concussion, but alive. How is he alive? Because humans are apparently made of rubber and poor decision-making, Krell muttered. He keyed the comm. Private Martinez, report your status. Status is spicy, Sarge. The oxygen thing is definitely faulty, getting about 70% of what I should be. The navigation computer is showing me what I think are ancient shopping lists. And there's something big circling my position. By big, I mean I can see its shadow and it's the size of a bus big. That would be a hunter beast, Krell said. Stay in the pod, they're attracted to movement. Little late for that, I'm already outside. Needed to stretch my legs after that landing. Every instructor in the cargo bay groaned simultaneously. Krell pulled up the visual feed from the orbital satellites and immediately regretted it. Jake was standing on top of his crashed pod, hands on his hips, staring up at a creature that was approximately 80% teeth and 20% bad attitude. The hunter beast, a massive reptilian predator with 6 legs and mandibles that could crush titanium, was staring back with what could only be described as confusion. Private Martinez, Krell said carefully, why are you on top of the pod? Better vantage point. Also, this thing seems confused. I think it's never seen anything stupid enough to not run away. There was a pause, then, oh wait, it's not confused. It's calling for backup. I can hear more of them. Hey Vorp, you might lose that bet. I'm thinking this goes south way before 47 minutes. On the satellite feed, Jake pulled something from his pocket. Krell zoomed in, then zoomed in again, then wondered if his eyes were malfunctioning. Is that a laser pointer? Sure is. Brought it from Earth. Cats go crazy for these things. Let's see if we've got galactic convergent evolution in action here. Jake activated the laser pointer and aimed the red dot at the ground in front of the hunter beast. What happened next would be analyzed in xenobiology classes for years to come. The hunter beast, apex predator of Zerath 9, terror of the Red Wastes, a creature with a brain roughly the size of a walnut, but instincts honed by millions of years of evolution, saw the red dot and immediately tried to catch it. Jake moved the dot in a circle. The hunter beast followed it in a circle. Jake moved the dot toward the nearby rock formation. The hunter beast charged after it, crashed into the rocks, shook its massive head, and looked around in confusion. Holy crap, it actually works, Jake said, audible delight in his voice. Okay, new plan. I'm gonna lead these guys away from my position and then find shelter. Vorp, update your bet. I'm going for at least 2 hours now. Krell watched in silence as Jake Martinez, the human who'd asked for hard mode, led a pack of apex predators on a merry chase, using a children's toy and what could only be described as weaponized stupidity. In the background, he could hear Vorp frantically updating his statistical models and muttering about variables that shouldn't exist. Sergeant, Thex played in a chord that sounded like existential crisis. What have we done? I don't know, Krell admitted, watching Jake disappear into a cave system while 3 confused hunter beasts tried to figure out where their prey had gone. But I think we're going to need to rewrite the training manual. The cave Jake had chosen for shelter turned out to be occupied, which he discovered approximately 45 seconds after entering, when something in the darkness said, "Oh, great. Another idiot." Jake froze, his hand instinctively going to the multi-tool on his belt, then relaxed when he realized the voice was speaking Galactic Common and sounded more annoyed than threatening. He activated his helmet light, which flickered twice before deciding to work properly, and illuminated a creature that looked like someone had crossed a bear with an accordion and given it existential dread. Wait, Jake said, squinting at the figure. Are you one of the recruits? Was a recruit, the creature said, its fur rippling in what might have been a shrug. 6 months ago, name's Gerp. I'm from Blendaxia 7, which you've probably never heard of because nobody has, and I'm still here because Sergeant Krell is a sadistic nightmare, and this moon is trying very hard to kill me, but I'm too stubborn to die. Jake sat down on a nearby rock, careful not to disturb what looked like a very organized pile of supplies. So you've been surviving here for 6 months? That's actually kind of impressive. It's not impressive. It's spite-fueled existence. Gerp moved into the light, revealing that he was indeed bear-like, with thick fur that had clearly seen better days and eyes that held the haunted look of someone who'd been through too much. I hate Sergeant Krell. I hate this moon. I hate hunter beasts. I hate the weather. I hate the food that isn't food. Mostly I hate Krell, though. I'm staying alive purely to write the most scathing review of his training program when I get back to civilization." "That's beautiful," Jake said sincerely. "I'm Jake Martinez, by the way. Human, Earth. I asked for the hard mode, and Krell gave me Scenario Omega-7. "You asked for it?" GURP stared at him. "What's wrong with your species?" "That's a longer conversation than we probably have time for." Jake pulled out his ration pack and examined the expired date. "Hey, you've been eating these for 6 months. How bad is the food poisoning?" "You get used to it after the 3rd or 4th time. Now it's just part of my daily routine. Wake up, hate Krell, eat expired food, hate Krell some more, avoid predators, evening hatred of Krell, sleep, nightmares about Krell." GURP's fur rippled again. "Why are you here, really? And don't give me that hard mode garbage. Nobody asks for Omega-7 unless they're running from something or towards something equally stupid." Jake considered this while chewing on what might have been protein paste, or might have been synthetic rubber. "Honestly? I wanted to see if I could do it. Everyone in the galaxy talks about how tough the Coalition training is, how only the best of the best survive. I wanted to know if humans had what it takes." "And do you?" "Still alive, so that's a good sign." Jake pulled out a small device from his pack, studied it for a moment, then showed it to GURP. "Hey, you know what this is? My nav computer is useless, and my translator keeps trying to conjugate everything in ancient Vraxian." GURP leaned closer. "That's a distress beacon activator. You need to get to the extraction point about 15 kilometers north-northwest of here and set this up. But here's the fun part. It needs 3 people to operate simultaneously because Coalition safety protocols are designed by people who've never actually been in danger." "3 people? There's 2 of us. Exactly my problem for the last 6 months. I've been 1 person short, and nobody else has survived long enough to help." GURP's expression, as much as an accordion bear could have an expression, turned thoughtful. "But if you've got any of that famous human improvisation, maybe we could figure something out." Jake's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm that made sensible beings nervous. "Okay, so we need 3 people worth of coordination, but we've only got 2 bodies. What if we don't actually need 3 people? What if we just need 3 simultaneous inputs? The beacon requires 3 separate biometric readings and 3 buttons pressed at exactly the same time from 3 different positions. It's designed to prevent accidental activation." "Right, but what if we get creative with the biometric part?" Jake was already pulling things out of his pack, the duct tape, the multi-tool, what looked like a protein bar, but might have been a communications relay. "How specific are the biometric readers?" "They just need to detect a life sign, pulse, body heat, something living." GURP watched as Jake started assembling things in ways that probably violated several laws of physics. "What are you doing? Science, or stupidity. They're basically the same thing if you commit hard enough." Jake wrapped duct tape around what appeared to be 3 pieces of equipment that definitely weren't meant to go together. "Okay, here's the plan. We get to the extraction point. You hit your button. I hit my button. And this contraption, which I'm going to name Steve, handles the 3rd button." "You can't name a collection of equipment, Steve." "Just did. Steve needs to feel included in this operation." Jake held up the device, which was now sparking slightly. "Steve will use a delayed pressure release triggered by a biometric sensor I've repurposed from my medical kit. As long as Steve registers as alive, which he will because I've hooked him up to both our life signs, he can press the 3rd button. The timing will be tight, but it should work." GURP stared at the device, then at Jake, then back at the device. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. The duct tape alone is a violation of about 15 safety protocols." "Yeah, but will it work?" "It might. Which is somehow more disturbing than if you'd just said it wouldn't work at all." GURP stood up, gathering his own meager supplies. "All right, human. Let's go make terrible decisions together. When this kills us, I want you to know it's been nice meeting someone as dumb as I've felt for the last 6 months." "That's the spirit. Sort of. Kind of. We're working on it." Jake strapped Steve to his back and checked his oxygen regulator, which was definitely not providing the recommended amount of breathable air, but was still technically functioning. "How's the terrain between here and extraction?" "Terrible. There's a mountain range that's actively volcanic, a valley full of plants that explode when you touch them, and the hunter-beast breeding grounds, which is exactly as fun as it sounds. Gerp moved to the cave entrance and peered out into the red-tinged landscape. Oh, and there's a Category 5 storm system moving in. Should be here in about 3 hours. Perfect, gives us a deadline. I work better under pressure. Jake joined him at the entrance, looking out at Zerath 9's hostile terrain with the expression of someone about to do something incredibly ill-advised. You ready? No, but I've been not ready for 6 months. At least now I've got company in my wrongness. Gerp glanced at Jake. One question. If we survive this, what are you going to do? Probably ask Krell for an even harder scenario, Jake said honestly. Your species is doomed, Gerp said. Yeah, but we'll have fun on the way down. Up in orbit, Sergeant Krell watched the satellite feed as 2 figures emerged from the cave system and began moving toward the extraction point. Beside him, Vorp was frantically updating his betting pool. The human found Gerp, Vorp said, bubbling with excitement and dread in equal measure. I didn't factor in alliance formation. Also, what is that device on his back? Is that duct tape? Why does he have duct tape? I don't know, Krell said quietly, and that's what worries me. Thex played a rising scale that sounded like impending disaster mixed with reluctant admiration. On the surface, Jake and Gerp headed toward almost certain doom, armed with broken equipment, expired rations, improvised technology, and the kind of determination that came from having absolutely nothing to lose. The storm clouds gathered on the horizon, the hunter beasts howled in the distance, and somewhere the universe prepared itself for whatever chaos was about to unfold. It was going to be a long 3 hours. The thing about Category 5 storm systems on Zerath 9, Jake learned as the first drops of acid rain began falling, was that they didn't build up gradually. One moment the sky was its normal angry red color, and the next moment it looked like someone had flipped a switch labeled Apocalypse, and then broken the switch so it couldn't be turned off. Wind speeds went from gentle breeze to you're going to die in approximately 15 seconds. This is fine, Jake shouted over the roar of the wind, clinging to a rock outcropping while Gerp dug his claws into the ground beside him. This is totally fine. We've got this. We do not have this, Gerp shouted back, his fur plastered flat against his body by the wind and rain. The extraction point is still 8 kilometers away and the storm is getting worse. We need shelter. Shelter is for quitters. Jake checked Steve, who was still somehow functioning despite being soaked in acid rain and buffeted by wind strong enough to peel paint off a starship. We've got momentum. If we stop now, we'll never get started again. That's not how momentum works. Also, we're not moving. We're currently being stationary very aggressively. Jake looked around, his helmet display flickering and showing him what he was pretty sure were advertisements for vacation destinations. His oxygen regulator had given up entirely about an hour ago, leaving him breathing Zerath 9's atmosphere directly, which felt like inhaling broken glass mixed with disappointment. But he'd had worse. That tequila in Tijuana had been way harsher. Okay, new plan, Jake said, spotting something in the distance through the rain. See that valley? The one that drops down toward the extraction point? The one that's currently flooding with acidic runoff and has a 40-degree incline. That's the one. What if we don't walk down it? What if we ride down it? Gerp turned to look at Jake with an expression that transcended species barriers and clearly communicated, absolutely not. Out loud, he said, absolutely not. Hear me out. We've got the heat shield from my drop pod. It's curved, reasonably durable, and extremely slippery when wet. Which it now is. You want to surf down a mountain during a Category 5 storm system, while acid rain eats through our equipment, and hunter beasts hunt for prey stupid enough to be out in this weather. Which, to be clear, is us. When you say it like that, it sounds insane, Jake admitted. But consider this. We've got about 90 minutes before the storm gets even worse. The extraction point is right at the bottom of that valley. And Steve is starting to spark in ways that suggest he's not going to last much longer. We need speed, and walking ain't gonna cut it. Somewhere in orbit, Sergeant Krell was having the kind of stress-induced episode that would require weeks of therapy. He watched the satellite feed, which was barely functioning through the storm interference, as Jake Martinez, the human who'd asked for hard mode, seriously considered turning a piece of critical safety equipment into a makeshift sled. "He can't be serious," Krell said, though by now he should have known better. "He's detaching the heat shield," Vorp reported, his gelatinous body practically vibrating with anxiety. "He's absolutely serious. Oh, this is bad. This is so bad. I need to update all my statistical models. Nothing in my training prepared me for someone who responds to terrible situations by making them worse on purpose." On the ground, Jake had successfully removed the heat shield from his wrecked drop pod. A process that had required his multi-tool, the remaining duct tape, and several words that the translator decided were better left untranslated. The shield was roughly 2 meters long, curved like a shallow bowl, and made of a material designed to withstand atmospheric entry. It was not designed to be a sled. But then again, Jake figured, the universe was full of things that weren't designed for their best use cases. "I hate this," Gerp said, climbing onto the shield behind Jake. "I want it on record that I hate this, and I'm only doing this because staying here means death, and going with you means probable death, which is statistically better." "That's the spirit. Now hold on to me, keep Steve stable, and whatever you do, don't let go." Jake positioned himself at the front of the shield, his feet braced against the slight lip. "On 3. 1, 2... Wait, shouldn't we plan this better? Shouldn't we discuss trajectories and wind resistance and— 3. Jake pushed off, and suddenly they were moving. The first 5 seconds were actually not terrible. They slid down the slope at a reasonable pace, the heat shield gliding over the wet rock with surprising stability. Jake had a moment to think that maybe, just maybe, this was going to work. Then they hit the steeper section, and reasonable went out the window and got replaced by oh God, we're all going to die. They accelerated down the mountain, at speeds that were probably illegal in several star systems. The acid rain pelted them from above, the wind tried to rip them off the shield, and hunter beasts scattered out of their path because even apex predators had enough sense to get out of the way of whatever madness was coming down the mountain. "This is insane," Gerp screamed. His claws dug into Jake's shoulders hard enough to leave marks. "This is working," Jake shouted back, steering by shifting his weight. They hit a bump, went briefly airborne, and landed with a crash that would have shattered every bone in a sensible person's body. Jake felt his ribs complain but held on. "Steve, how are you doing back there?" Steve, the collection of equipment that had no business functioning, sparked in what Jake chose to interpret as enthusiasm. They were about halfway down when Jake spotted the problem. The valley was flooding, just like Gerp had predicted, and they were heading straight for what was essentially a river of acid moving at high velocity. The extraction point was on the other side. There was no way they could stop in time, and trying to steer around it would mean crashing into the rocks. "We're going to have to jump it," Jake decided. "Jump what? The river of acid? The river of acid that's about 50 meters wide and moving faster than we are." "Yeah, that one." Jake spotted a natural ramp formed by fallen rocks. "If we hit that at the right angle and speed, we can make it. And if we don't, then we dissolve in acid, which honestly isn't even in my top 5 worst-case scenarios for today." Jake adjusted their trajectory, aiming for the ramp. "Ready? No!" "Great, here we go." They hit the ramp at approximately 80 kilometers per hour, which Jake's rapidly failing helmet display helpfully informed him was 40% faster than the heat shield's recommended maximum speed. They launched into the air, still on the shield, with the storm raging around them and the acid river waiting below. For a moment, suspended in the air with Zerath 9's angry red sky above, and certain death below, Jake had time to think that this was either the coolest thing he'd ever done or the stupidest. Possibly both. They cleared the river by approximately half a meter. The landing was less triumphant. They hit the ground on the far side. The heat shield cracked down the middle, and they tumbled through mud and rocks before finally sliding to a stop at the base of the valley. Jake lay there for a moment, staring up at the sky, cataloguing his injuries. Definitely some broken ribs, possibly a concussion. His left arm felt weird, but he was alive, and more importantly, the extraction point was right there, about 100 meters away. "Gerp," Jake said. "You alive?" "Technically," Gerp groaned from somewhere nearby. "But I'm going to need therapy. So much therapy. Multiple species worth of therapy." Jake sat up, checked his equipment, and smiled. Steve was still functioning, somehow, held together by duct tape and sheer determination. "Come on, we're almost there. Let's finish this." They limped toward the extraction point, two battered figures in a storm that was trying very hard to kill them. The distress beacon terminal stood waiting, a three-sided platform with buttons positioned exactly far enough apart to require 3 people. "Okay," Jake said, pulling Steve from his back and setting up the improvised third operator. "This is it. Gerp, you take position 1. I'll take position 2. Steve gets position 3. On my mark, we all press simultaneously. The beacon goes up, rescue comes, and we get to tell this story at bars for the rest of our lives. Or we die and become a cautionary tale," Gerp said, taking his position. "Optimism, Gerp. Work with me here." Jake set up Steve, activated the biometric sensors, and prayed to whatever gods watched over idiots and fools. 3, 2, 1, mark! 3 buttons pressed simultaneously. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the beacon activated, sending a brilliant beam of light straight up through the storm. A signal visible from orbit that screamed, "We're here, come get us into the void." They'd done it. Against all odds, against all probability, against all common sense, they'd actually done it. Jake collapsed next to the beacon, exhausted and possibly dying, but definitely victorious. Beside him, Gerp was laughing, a sound somewhere between hysteria and relief. "We survived," Gerp said. "We actually survived." "Told you we'd make it," Jake said, his vision starting to blur at the edges. 47 minutes and 33 seconds out of pure spite." "We've been out here for 3 hours and 18 minutes, Gerp corrected. "But who's counting?" In orbit, Krell stared at the monitors in silence. The beacon was active. The vital signs showed 2 survivors. Against every prediction, every simulation, every reasonable expectation, they'd completed Scenario Omega-7. "Dispatch the rescue ship," Krell said quietly. "Already on the way, Sergeant," Vorp replied. "ETA 6 minutes. Also, I owe several people a lot of credits. This outcome wasn't even in my statistical models as a possibility." Thex played a chord that sounded like profound confusion, mixed with something that might have been respect. Krell just kept staring at the screen, at the 2 life signs waiting for extraction, and realized that he was going to have to completely rethink everything he knew about training, survival, and apparently, the capabilities of humanity. The rescue ship arrived 4 minutes later, cutting through the storm with emergency protocols. They found Jake and Gerp at the extraction point, soaked, injured, and triumphant. As they were loaded onto stretchers, Jake managed one more smile. "Same time next week, Sarge?" he asked over the comm. Krell didn't answer. He was too busy wondering if early retirement was really such a bad idea after all. The medical bay declared Jake Martinez physically intact, but psychologically concerning after a 3-hour examination that involved several confused doctors. Multiple scans that came back with results labeled anomalous but not immediately fatal, and one memorable moment where Jake asked if he could keep the X-ray of his ribs as a souvenir. They'd healed him up, pumped him full of antibiotics to handle whatever he'd breathed on Zerath 9, and cleared him for duty with the kind of reluctance usually reserved for activating doomsday devices. Gerp, meanwhile, had been reunited with civilization and promptly requested a transfer to literally anywhere else in the galaxy, plus 6 months of paid therapy, plus a written apology from Sergeant Krell. He got the therapy. The apology was still pending. Now Jake sat in debriefing room 3, which was less intimidating than briefing room 7, but still had the same underlying vibe of, "We're very disappointed in you." Krell sat across from him, all 4 arms folded, looking like someone who'd just discovered that his entire career had been leading up to this moment of profound regret. Vorp was in the corner, no longer leaving anxiety puddles, but definitely vibrating at a frequency that suggested internal distress. Thex stood by the door, resonating in a minor key that Jake's translator interpreted as existential contemplation. "So?" Krell began, his voice carefully neutral. "Scenario Omega-7, completed. You're the first being in the history of this training facility to survive it." "Cool," Jake said, taking a bite of his sandwich. He'd discovered the cafeteria made a really good turkey club, and after 3 hours on a death moon, He was taking full advantage. "What's next? You got an Omega-8? "We don't have an Omega-8, Krell said slowly, because we never thought anyone would survive Omega-7. It was a theoretical exercise, a demonstration of worst-case scenarios. It was never meant to be beaten. Well, technically GURP helped, and Steve was instrumental in the beacon activation. It was a team effort." Jake pulled out his datapad and began typing. "Speaking of which, I filled out the after-action feedback form. Want to hear my notes?" "I'm not sure I do," Krell admitted. "Too bad, I'm excited to share." Jake cleared his throat. "Overall experience, 8 out of 10. Would be 9, but the expired rations really were aggressively expired. Scenario design was solid. Good mix of environmental hazards and active threats. The equipment sabotage was chef's kiss. Really sold the impossible vibe. Suggestions for improvement: more explosions, maybe add some lava flows. And consider throwing in a time limit just to spice things up." Vorp made a sound like bubbles popping in horror. "More? You want more?" I mean, it was hard mode, but it wasn't hard mode, you know? Like, I definitely felt challenged, but I never felt like it was completely impossible. Which means there's room to dial it up. Jake scrolled through his notes. "Oh, also, the hunter beasts are susceptible to laser pointers. You might want to brief future recruits on that. Could save lives." "Private Martinez," Krell said, and his voice had taken on the tone of someone carefully maintaining their sanity through force of will alone. "Do you understand what you've done? You've completed a scenario with a 0.003% survival rate. You did it with compromised equipment during a Category 5 storm, while improvising solutions that violated approximately 17 safety protocols and possibly the laws of physics." "Yeah, it was a pretty good Tuesday," Jake agreed. "It's Wednesday." "Is it, huh? Felt like a Tuesday." Jake finished his sandwich and pulled out another from his bag. The medical bay had cleared him for unlimited cafeteria access, which he'd immediately abused. "So, what happens now? Do I graduate? Get assigned to a unit? Get a medal? I'm fine with any of those options." Krell pulled up a holographic display showing the statistics from Jake's run. Survival time, distance traveled, threats encountered, protocols violated, and at the bottom a single line that made Krell's primary stomach hurt. "Status: Scenario completed successfully. New baseline required." "We have to redesign the entire training program," Krell said, and he sounded tired in a way that transcended species. "Because of you, Private Martinez, every recruit in this facility is going to expect human-level difficulty. The Vraxians are already asking for the laser pointer technique. The Kragthons want to know about duct tape applications. The Harmonites are trying to figure out how to replicate your complete lack of survival instinct." "That's not a lack of survival instinct," Jake protested. "That's optimized risk assessment combined with creative problem-solving. You surfed down a mountain during a storm on a piece of equipment not designed for surfing. And it worked. That's not the point." Krell's voice had risen to what his species called the command shout, and everyone else called the "please stop giving me paperwork" scream. He took a breath, all 4 hands pressed flat against the desk. "Private Martinez, Jake, I need you to understand something. What you did on Zerath 9 was not normal. It was not standard. It was not something we can teach or replicate or even fully explain to the other recruits. You survived through a combination of ridiculous luck, improvisation that bordered on insanity, and apparently some kind of genetic predisposition to not understanding when you should be afraid." "So what you're saying is I passed?" "With honors," Krell admitted. "Technically, you'll be assigned to Echo Squadron's Special Operations Division. They specialize in impossible missions and lost causes. You'll fit right in." Sweet. Jake stood up, brushed sandwich crumbs off his uniform, and extended his hand for another shake. "Thanks for the opportunity, Sarge. This was fun. Let's do it again sometime." Krell looked at the offered hand, then at Jake's face, then at Vorp, who had given up entirely and was now just a puddle of resignation. "Private Martinez, before you go, I need to know. Why? Why did you ask for hard mode? Why did you push yourself like this? What were you trying to prove?" Jake thought about it for a moment, his expression becoming unusually serious. "Back on Earth, there's this thing we say. When someone tells you something's impossible, you've got two choices. You can believe them and never try, or you can say, watch this and give it a shot anyway. I wanted to know if humans could hang with the rest of the galaxy, not just survive, but actually compete. And yeah, maybe I'm a little crazy for wanting the hardest possible challenge, but that's kind of the point. If we're going to be out here, exploring and fighting and existing alongside all you guys, we need to know we belong. And the only way to know is to try. It was the most thoughtful thing Jake had said since arriving at Camp Oblivion. Krell found himself almost respecting the human's perspective. Almost. That's very philosophical, Private, Krell said. Thanks, I stole it from a motivational poster. Jake grinned, and just like that, the moment of profundity evaporated. So, Echo Squadron. They got a good cafeteria? Just go, Krell said, waving him toward the door with two hands while the other two rubbed his temples. And, Private, try not to volunteer for anything without checking with your commanding officer first. We're trying to minimize the number of humans who attempt the impossible before we understand how you keep surviving it. No promises, Sarge, Jake said, and left the room whistling something that sounded suspiciously like a victory theme. After he was gone, the three instructors sat in silence. Finally, Thex played a melody that translated to, "We're going to see him again, aren't we?" "Oh, definitely," Vorp said, his voice resigned. "That one's going to be in all the incident reports for years." Krell leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere out there, Jake Martinez was joining an elite unit that specialized in impossible odds. They were going to love him, or he was going to drive them insane. Possibly both, probably both. But there was something else, something Krell couldn't quite shake. Jake had completed Scenario Omega-7. A human, in his first real training exercise, had survived something that was designed to be unsurvivable, and he'd done it not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through improvisation, determination, and apparently laser pointers. If one human could do that, what could humanity do as a species? Krell pulled up his personal logs and began typing a report that would eventually make its way to Coalition High Command. The report's conclusion was simple. Humanity was not a threat to the galaxy. Humanity was something far more concerning. They were unpredictable, adaptable, and apparently incapable of recognizing when they should give up. The title of his report, Threat Assessment, Human Integration into Coalition Forces, Recommended Protocol. Stay out of their way and document everything. 3 days later, Jake Martinez shipped out with Echo Squadron. His first mission brief included the phrase 90% fatality rate. And Jake's first question was whether that was the easy mode or hard mode. His commanding officer, a Vraxian veteran named Commander Zrek, made a note in Jake's file. Possible asset, probable disaster, definite entertainment value. Back at Camp Oblivion, Sergeant Krell started redesigning the training scenarios. He added a new difficulty level, one step above Omega-7, and labeled it Human Standard. Then he poured himself a drink, updated his retirement timeline, and wondered not for the first time if the galaxy was ready for humanity. The galaxy, for its part, was about to find out. And somewhere Jake Martinez was already asking what came after impossible. The answer, as the universe would soon discover, was whatever humans decided to try next. And that was somehow more terrifying than any death world, any impossible scenario, any threat the galaxy had ever faced. Because the humans weren't coming to save the galaxy, they were coming to make it everyone else's problem, and they were going to have a great time doing it.